buying behavior of final consumers and users or individuals, households, or even organizations, sometimes small organizations who buy goods and service for their own use, for their personal consumption. Okay. You are all consumers, students are all consumers, and it is really interesting to know that, like, maybe think about your past consumption behavior. What kind of consumption behavior? What kind of product, service did you purchase within 2 days? Can you just share, just write a word? What kind of service did you buy? Okay. Probably you bought something, or sometimes even you consume something, right? That's all about consumer behavior. Okay. Then what is consumer markets? Consumer markets are not, it's different from marketplace. I already mentioned. It's made of all the individuals and households that buy or acquire goods and service for personal consumption. Mhm. Okay. So there is a model of consumer behavior. Lots of scholars conducted research about this whole mechanism. For example, here, there's it's called buyer's black box, consumer's black box, and the environment that affect this consumer's characteristics or their decision process. And throughout this black box, maybe consumers has this responses, for example, making decision, buying attitudes, preference, purchase behavior, brand engagement, and relationship. That's the whole process of this model of consumer behavior. So there's a stimuli, and throughout this black box, usually it's really hard to explain what kind of black box in like your mind, right? That's why we need consumer research. And throughout this black box, probably there are kind of buyer's response, okay? We can sometimes measure what's, where's, and when's of consumer buying behavior, but it's actually really difficult to see inside the consumer's head, and that's, we can call this as black box, okay? Figure out the ways of buying behavior, okay? The marketer spends a lot of energy and money trying to figure out what makes consumer like change their like behavior. Okay, we need to understand this using lots of efforts. Okay. Consumer purchase are influenced strongly by cultural, social, personal, and psychological characteristics as shown in this image figure. And for the most part, marketers cannot control such factors because it's external factors. You cannot control your culture, right? You're just individual. You cannot control subculture or your like just current social class, okay? Or your family. It's just natural born thing, okay? Maybe some personal characteristics, psychological characteristics. Sometimes it's really hard to control such factors, but you need to actually consider these factors because it affects your consumer behavior a lot. Okay. So here, maybe you might understand, it's a little bit difficult to understand what is subculture. Many brands now target the specific subcultures, such as like here, Hispanic American, African American, like Asian American. That's different types of specific subcultures because among these subcultures, they have like different characteristics, backgrounds, right? So if you want to target those segments, you need to make different marketing strategy. That's segmentation, targeting, and positioning part. We're going to talk about this in the next chapter. Okay. We already talked about lots of examples of the 4 types of buying behavior. So to understand this, it's better to understand what is high involvement versus low involvement concept. Okay, so high involvement purchases lead to more active, careful decision making, usually more expensive in nature, requiring more time and effort in the research phase. Probably you need to consider more to make decision because it's not easy decision. Less frequently purchased, more meaningful to you. That's high involvement concept, high involvement purchase. For example, a baby seat or maybe wedding related product or like very expensive car, house. That's usually high involvement products. What is low involvement? Um, it's not that meaningful to you, just frequent purchase, habitual consumption, not that expensive, usually bought with a minimum amount of thought and effort, just kind of let's just think about like a bottle of water. Usually it's a low involvement products. And very expensive products, high involvement. And I already mentioned shampoo, right? Shampoo is usually considered as a low involvement product, but to some segments, for some consumers, if their hairs are really important for their career or just like their beauty, maybe shampoo can be high involvement products. So it depends on personal situation, maybe cultural difference, personal characteristics. They're just personal needs. Okay. So we now understand what is high involvement versus low involvement. So do you understand the difference between this high versus low involvement? Just you can just write any example of high versus low. You can just write a word again. Okay. And there are two different axes. The first one is significant difference between brands and few differences between brands. Okay. So it's also kind of subjective thing, right? For some consumers, you think that I think this brand and this brand, it's really different. Brand A and B, it's really different. For some consumers, I don't think I cannot find any difference between these two brands. Then we can just call this few differences between brands. So anyway, in case of high involvement situation, and let's say there are huge differences between brands, high involvement thing, so it's not easy consumption, right? So we can call this complex buying behavior. In case of low involvement with significant difference between brands, we can call this variety seeking buying behavior. Are you variety seeking consumer? Yes or no? Are you variety seeking buying behavior? Do you tend to variety seeking for your any consumption? Actually, maybe it depends on some product category, right? So variety seeking buying behavior, you can easily switch brands, okay? And what about habitual buying behavior? Low involvement and few differences between brands. Of course, there might be difference between brands, but as a consumer, you cannot easily find any difference because it's not that meaningful, okay? So habitual buying behavior in that case. What about dissonance reducing buying behavior? We're going to talk about more about cognitive dissonance in the later part of this decision-making process. Here, dissonance reducing buying behavior, it's high involvement, even though it's really not easy consumption, but you don't know much about this product category. So you cannot find any difference between brands. Maybe because of designs are really similar. For example, usually just classic example is carpet, furniture. It's an examples of this dissonance reducing buying behavior. Just in case I just put the full explanation about each category, complex buying behavior, it's a typical for expensive or self-expressive goods. Dissonance reducing buying behavior, it refers to post-purchase grade. We're going to talk about this post-purchase grade later. So first, when consumers are high involved but see little difference among brands, carpet, furniture, Okay, habitual buying behavior, it's low involvement with few significant brand difference. Consumers buy out of habit without much effort because it's habitual buying behavior. Okay, low involvement, low involvement. Variety seeking buying behavior, low consumer involvement, but you can see significant difference between brands. So in these cases, consumers often do a lot of brand switching. Okay, think about your example. For example, snacks, you can maybe easily switch the brand, right? Okay, now let's focus on this five process about this buyer decision process. In consumer behavior class, we can see that actually it doesn't happen in the all cases. It's more about cognitive decision-making process. It's more about high involvement decision-making process. Well, let's see one by one from the first stage. Okay. The need recognition. It occurs when the buyers recognize a problem or needs triggered by internal stimuli. It's from your memory. It's from your experience. You can just recall information in memory. Okay, external stimuli, you can maybe seek information from outside sources. For example, advertisement. You didn't have any needs before, but let's say you just watched this TV advertisements about this new smartphone. Then you just found out that, oh, I need this smartphone, I need to buy it, right? That's external stimuli. Internal stimuli, it's just from your previous memory, just recall information. It's just from your inner thought. That's internal stimuli. Okay, move on to the next stage, information search. So you recognize that you had this needs. Now you're gonna search valuable information. What kind of sources of information you can use? First one is personal sources from family and friends, or commercial sources, advertising or internet search, public sources, mass media or consumer organizations, or experiential sources, handling, examining, using the product. That's why lots of companies actually do some of this, right? Of course, they do advertising. They show their products information throughout the internet, mass media, family, friends. They use word of mouth, online word of mouth, and handling, examining, using the product. It means like they have to make this consumer delight, consumer happiness from their experience, because when consumers search information, they also use their past experience or maybe their trial experience. It's also really important. Okay. Now let's move on to the third stage, evaluation of alternative. It's the stage of the buyer decision process in which consumers use information to evaluate alternative brands in the choice app. So there are kind of rules. It's kind of mental calculation, mental rules. It may involve comparison on a few key attributes. It may involve complex calculations and a ranking of each brand, right? So for example, here, let's say you're thinking of buying a new laptop, okay? And there are total brands. Maybe some brands you cannot think of, you cannot easily recall, but still it's existing, right? Let's say there are 50 different brands. And this awareness set, Apple, Dell, HP, Toshiba, Compaq, that's your awareness set. So all of the brands you can recognize or you can recall, that's awareness set. Consideration set, even though you know HP or Compaq, but you'll never consider those two brands for your final decision. You can only consider Apple, Dell, and Toshiba. Then these three brands are consideration set. If you're a marketer, you have to make your all efforts to persuade consumers to consider your brand in this consideration set. That's really starting point. Okay, even though they know your brand, if they don't never consider your brand in this consideration set, it's just losing game, right? So you need to satisfy consumers' initial buying criteria. Okay, that's consideration set. And after considering maybe these three different brands, consumer would choose, make a decision, like make their minds to compare between only these last two. Okay, Apple versus Dell, that's choice set, and maybe their final decision. This is the process of consumer decision making. Okay, so here's an example. Let's say you're gonna buy this laptop, and there are different attributes. Okay, consumers' evaluation of brand beliefs about laptops. What kind of attributes can you suggest? Except this. Here is an example: memory capacity, graphics, size and weight, and price. What else? Can you write it? What else? Okay, so let's see memory. There are different brands from A, B, C, and D. So which brand is the high quality in terms of memory capacity? It's C, right? In terms of graphic, A, size, D, price, A, right? So it's really hard to calculate in this case. So we need to think about actually weight, like which attributes it's more important in your case. Okay, probably you also mentioned about design, maybe material. There are lots of things you need to consider, right? So you can just calculate this with weight, okay? It's possible. But usually consumers don't actually really calculate it using like Excel spreadsheet. It's more about abstract calculation. It's just mental calculation. Now, next step is purchasing decision. Okay. The purchasing decision is the buyer's decision about which brand to purchase. Once the evaluation is complete, alternative evaluation is complete, consumers' purchase decision will generally be to buy the most preferred brand. Of course, you will choose the most preferred brand, right? Most preferred brand. Okay. And here, the purchase decision can be affected by attitudes of others, like your friends, family, someone special, or your senior, maybe even influencer, right? And affected by unexpected situational factors. Okay, for example, you decided to purchase this specific car, and let's say your leg is broken by accident. You need to delay your decision because it's useless to purchase the car right now because you cannot drive, right? So purchase decision can be affected by attitudes of others and unexpected situational factors. Okay. So now let's just focus on the last step, post-purchase decision. Okay. Post-purchase behavior is a stage of the buyer decision process in which consumers take further action after purchase based on their satisfaction and dissatisfaction. Okay. Sometimes you can just think that you're just satisfied with your final decision. Sometimes not. It depends on your expectation and your actual outcome, right? So marketer's job does not end when the products just bought, when they sell their products. After purchasing product, consumers might be either satisfied or dissatisfied, and sometimes they do something. If you're not satisfied with your product or service, what would you do? That's my question. If you're not satisfied with your product, let's say just think about any product or service within 1 month and you were not satisfied. with that? What would you do? What would be your next behavior? Can you share? What will be your next behavior? Okay. So as a marketer, they have to control this consumer's next behavior because it's really sometimes risky for their sales, right? You need to think about that. So what determines whether the buyer is satisfied or dissatisfied with a purchase? Maybe the answer lies in the relationship between consumers' expectation and the product's perceived performance. Okay. So consumer satisfaction is a key to building profitable customer relationship. So if you're a marketer, you have to go beyond just merely meeting the expectations of consumers. Our aim should be delighting consumers. That would make consumers make positive word of mouth about your brand or service, products to other people, other potential consumers. It affects a lot, right? It's really, really important. Okay. Let's talk about cognitive dissonance more after I cover the rest of the parts. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit more about buyer decision process for new products. It's can just call this adoption process. Okay. So adoption process is the mental process individuals goes through from first learning about an innovation to final regular use. We're gonna talk about this more in product and new product development chapter. Okay, so there are different stages in the adoption process. It includes awareness, interest, evaluation, trial, and adoption. It's actually kind of common sense. Consumers go through these 5 stages in the process of adopting new product. And this model suggests that new product marketers should think about how to help consumers move through these stages. Okay. So for example, if consumers are not buying a new product because they do not perceive a need for it, marketing might launch advertising message that trigger the need and show how the product solves customer problems. Okay. So awareness, consumers becomes aware of the new products but lacks information about it. Interest. It's also really important. You have to make maybe using advertising consumers aware your brand and have interest about your brand. Okay. Evaluation. Consumer considers whether trying the new products makes sense. Okay. Trier. Consumer tries the new products on a small scale to improve his or her estimate of its value. So these days, lots of brands use this trier as their marketing strategy. Okay. For example, they borrow their new product to consume potential consumers and just try it, and you can just like get it back within 1 week, and like maybe their like purchasing rate would be increased. Adoption: the consumer decides to make full and regular use of the new product. Okay. So if consumers knows about the product but are not buying because they hold unfavorable attitude toward it, marketers must find ways to change either the product or consumer perceptions, maybe both. Okay. Our last part is, have you heard of this term? Innovators, early adopters, early mainstream, late mainstream, or lagging adopters. Okay, so people differ in this readiness, greatly in their readiness, try to new products. In each product area, there are consumption pioneers. Maybe these areas are more about consumption pioneers and early adopters. Other individuals adopt new products much later. Where are you located? Here, among these 5. Could you just write where are you located? people can be classified into the adopter categories. So innovators, they try new ideas at some risk. Early adopters, they are usually, we can just call this opinion leaders. If you're a brand manager, you need to listen to innovators, early adopters a lot, right? And early mainstream is, although they rarely are leaders, but they adopt new ideas before the average person. So still, this innovators, early adopters, early mainstreams are consumption pioneers, maybe. Okay. Late mainstream is usually they tend to be more skeptical in like adopting new products. They're care a lot, consider a lot. They adopt an innovation only after a majority of people have tried it. Lagging adopters are very traditional one. They are suspicious of changes and adopt innovation only when it has become something of a tradition itself. Very safe choice. Okay. So this adopter classification suggests that innovating firm should research the characteristics of innovators and early adopters in their product categories and direct initial marketing efforts towards them. You need to understand their characteristics. You need to maybe conduct interview for them for better understanding. Okay, that's it for chapter 4. I'm gonna show more materials using video. So and after that, I'm gonna talk more. Okay, let's just see one by one. 네, 여러분. 챕터 4는 그렇게까지 어렵지 않으시긴 할 텐데요. 그래도 제가 영상을 좀 보여드릴 테니까 그거 좀 보시면서 조금 더 도움이 되시면 좋겠어요. 그래서 영상 한번 볼게요. 제가 나중에 그 영상 다시 붙여 넣어 드릴게요. 여러분 다시 보실 수 있게.